Hey, I'm Osman Faruqi, and this is The Drop, a culture show from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, where we dive into the latest in the world of pop culture and entertainment. The gang's all here. I'm here with Mel Cambry and Thomas Mitchell. What's up, team? How we doing?
Good.
Yeah, very good. Nice to be back. How are you down there?
Oh, thank you for asking. That's very kind. I'm in better spirits than I have been previously. I don't know if you guys have seen the news, but Wayne Bennett, Supercoach, is back at South Sydney. We're paying him enormous amounts of money to rescue our failing club. So I got a spring in my step off the back of that news.
Yes, I mean he's about 200 years old now. But he's still probably the best coach in that age bracket.
Yeah, I feel like these sorts of announcements are made just to reassure kind of players and fans that, look, we have a plan here. It's unclear whether or not it's a great plan, but it's just, don't freak out. You know Wayne, he's very good. He works very well with this cohort of players. Just don't shit yourselves, guys. We've got this sorted. So I'm excited about getting slightly more reinvested in NRL this year than I have been for the last few weeks.
We are famously, Thomas and I, the worst NRL tippers in the office. Every year we sign up for the tipping comp. Every year it turns out that both of us are being pursued for our tipping funds.
Yeah.
And then every year both of us forget to tip and get expelled from the competition.
I actually opted out this year just because I couldn't deal with the stress.
I also opted out this year because the wonderful Jason, who manages the tipping comp, had just increasingly threatened to kill me for not paying, the tipping fees.
I became afraid to come to work because
Yeah.
I was like, and in the end we were both like, why don't we just pay it? Something in us resisted. The more we were chased, the less we wanted
And
to
for a
give
pretty-
what was
Also, because by the
decided.
time you're in like round 6 and you haven't paid, you're not going to win. So what is the incentive to put money into the system now?
For a slender man, he's quite terrifying too. He walks around with his Dragons hat. He's a Dragons fan, and he's broken legs before, I reckon.
His,
I'm sure he
his
won't
Slack
mind
He has a
emoji is
big
also like he's got a permanent Slack emoji that is just the Dragons logo. He's an incredible guy.
And he also wears a big scarf, and there's something about a big scarf on a small man which is frightening.
This is just us auditioning for our sports podcast that they won't let us have. So we smuggle it in to this one. Thomas, it's good to have you back. How was your adventure to the town or place that we're not allowed to say until you tell us about it in a piece you're writing for later this year?
Allegedly riding.
Northern Territory was really good. It was amazing up there, but we'll talk about that more later. But I would say, sadly, I noticed that in my 1 week absence, not a single review missing my nuance.
I was going to bring this up. It is funny because when I was away earlier this year, there was some reviews saying nice things that they missed me. When Mel was away, there was some reviews saying nice things about people missing her. And when you were away, no one said anything.
Okay, firstly, I was away for 1 week. So be careful what you wish for. I will take an extended break and then I will set up a bunch of burner accounts like Martha from Baby Reindeer and I will be demanding the return of Thomas.
And to be fair, we talked about you so much on the pod. It was almost like you were in the room with us. I
You
think
did,
that's
actually,
why.
I listened to the pod as well,
Did you?
unlike you, just purely to hear my own name. And it came up a fair bit, but it was a great episode. Obviously, it missed that magical element, but now we're all back together.
It's great. And Mel, we are recording this episode slightly later than usual. Part of the reason for that is you were being very busy and famous on Wednesday at the Sydney Writers Festival, which has kicked off this week. Can you tell us a bit about that and what the vibes are like this year at the Writers Fest?
Famous definitely feels a bit of a stretch, but the vibes are great. This was kind of the opening day. It was at the State Library of New South Wales in this beautiful new auditorium they've got down there where the walls all kind of look like wooden books, which is very fitting. I was interviewing Lauren Groff, who wrote The Vaster Wilds, which I talked about a few months ago on the pod, and Matrix and Fates and Furies, which is probably her most famous one. She was great. She's very interesting. She's just opened a bookstore and she's really campaigning against book banning, and the bookstore called The Links, it really champions banned books. Like, it's got a whole wall of them and its whole project is to make sure and to react against the book banning that's going on in Florida, and has obviously kind of been a topic of discussion here. So she was great. And then in the afternoon, I spoke to Susan Wyndham, former literary editor here, about her new book, which is about Shelley Hazard and Elizabeth Harrower, and Gyan Yankovic, friend of the pod and our colleague here, who has a book out called Just Friends. And Thomas actually was in the audience for that one. So if you want any kind of feedback on the session. He is your man.
I do have some things to update you on.
Oh,
Osman.
wow.
I met Melanie's mother.
Oh, that's a good development.
It was amazing.
I tried.
It was
so
so-
hard to avoid this.
It was so funny.
Was it
You
like
would
seeing a
absol-
second Mel, or was it like a very different experience?
Well, in the most, like, I guess, Kembury family-esque way, Mel didn't even know her own mother was turning up. She surprised her at the Sydney Writers' Festival. And then obviously Mel tried to, like, not let me know that her mum was there. As soon as she let it slip, I went over there. We had an amazing chat. She loves the pod. She talked about the podcast. She also told me that I wasn't as broad as my photo in the paper. So that's something for me to
Which we
unpack.
then had to unpack for a lot. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? What
do
is
you mean
going
broad?
on?
Am I gonna
shouldered,
have-
broad in the abdominal region? And it's
I know. I was like, is that a good thing? Have I got a vibe with Mel's mum now? I don't know.
Well, then Mum followed up immediately after, being like, "That Tom was very nice." I was like, "What is going on here?"
But yes, it was very funny. And you're right. Mel, like, I've been to a few Sydney Writers Festivals with Mel, and she is like a celebrity there. She's kind of like the mayor. She's like kissing babies and
I
shaking
can
hands.
See that. I can see that.
It's amazing. And it always reminds me of, like, in like 21 Jump Street, when they go back to high school
Yeah.
and suddenly, like, Channing is the uncool
Yeah,
one
yeah,
and
yeah.
Jonah Hill is the cool one. That's what it's like going to, like, a Writers Festival with Mel compared to, like, a normal event.
Yeah, this is my field. Like when we go to the movies, you shine. At the Writers' Festival, I'm the one.
Yeah,
you
it's
guys
amazing.
are
But,
absolutely the mayors of those respective weird, small little culture worlds. That's very fun.
Yeah, it is. It's weird, but it was great. Mel did a very good job moderating. Gyan was amazing as well, and all in all, a fun afternoon out at the Writers' Festival.
And I will tell you a bit of trivia, just quickly. I was speaking to Lauren Groff in the green room, and here's another way to
The
smuggle
green
Taylor
room,
into
la-di-da.
into the green room, which is just like this barren room, and they had the weirdest like little food. It was like arancini balls, shapes, and then some like pastrami. It was very odd.
Is this the
little
green room
food
at the
offering.
State Library, or the one at Carriage Works, like the main green room?
This was at the State Library, yeah.
Because
So it
the
was all
Carriage
kind of
Works
mixed.
green room for the Writers' Festival, I got to say, I've been lucky enough in my life to go to many Writers' Festival green rooms. The Carriage Works one for the Writers' Festival, it's pretty top tier. There's like a barista, there's all sorts of
Yeah.
fancy drinks, there's like fresh food, there's fruit, there's salads. I think they turned it into like a wine bar after hours, but this was not quite
Yeah.
that level.
It wasn't quite that, but it was, it did the job of being a little holding room. But I was chatting to Lauren Groff, and she lives in Florida, and I was like, wow, how's Florida's rep since Taylor and Florence and the Machine's Florida song came out? Turns out, Florence and the Machine posted on Instagram that the song was based on Lauren Groff's collection of short stories
Whoa.
called Florida.
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa.
That's actually
And
cool.
apparently-
That's really cool.
yeah, and apparently they sold about 200 more copies of the short story
That's it?
that week. Yeah, I know, not heaps, but still, whole new
I
audience.
mean,
But, Lauren Groff
Taylor
said,
could post it. Come on, if you're inspired by this brilliant work, why don't you share that, Taylor?
yeah, or credit it. That's what I reckon. But yeah, apparently she woke up and her phone was just blowing up because Florence had posted
That's great.
crediting it. So yeah, very interesting.
We'll actually have more to say about Taylor Swift later in this episode. The main focus of today's episode is Furiosa, the latest installment in the Mad Max franchise. It's a follow-up to 2015's stunning Fury Road. It's the most expensive Australian film ever made. It's also one of the few remaining big-ticket event releases on the cinema calendar this year. So we're going to talk about the relatively lackluster lineup for the rest of 2024, but there are a few other newsy bits and pieces in the world of culture I wanted to talk to you guys about. Probably the most interesting has been the war between Scarlett Johansson and OpenAI, the company that is probably most well known for releasing ChatGPT, the AI prompt software. Thomas, you wrote about this stoush for us this week. Can you give us a bit of a breakdown? Why is Scarlett fired up at OpenAI?
Yeah, because I guess in a case of, life imitating art, imitating Scarlett Johansson in the movie Her, essentially a few weeks ago, OpenAI introduced the voice of Sky, so this new AI-assisted tool, like a conversation tool, and basically the voice sounded eerily similar to Scarlett Johansson. People were very quick to pick up on this, and also the fact that she did famously star in the Spike Jonze film Her, where she lent her voice to an AI starring opposite Joaquin Phoenix. So people were pretty quick to be like, this is weird. ScarJo has a very unique and noticeable voice. And, to the point where people on the internet were like, this is obviously Scarlett Johansson. Even her boyfriend, Colin Jost, made a joke about it on the SNL finale. So it was all kind of like, okay, this is odd. On the day of release as well, the OpenAI CEO, Sam Altman, just tweeted one single word, her, which everyone, kind of knows as a reference to that film. So it was all kind of there. And then this week, Scarlett Johansson came out and basically released a statement saying she was shocked and angered that this had happened because they actually approached her. She considered it for a little bit, but then ultimately said no, and then she says in her statement, when I heard the release demo, I was shocked and angered and in disbelief that Mr. Altman would pursue a voice that sounded so eerily similar to mine, that my closest friends and news outlets could not tell the difference. So yeah, very weird. Like, we've had so much chat about, what's happening with AI and the fact that OpenAI did approach Scarlett. She said no, and they kind of like went ahead and did it anyway. So similarly, basically the way they framed it, they've paused the use of the voice because she did engage legal counsel. Yeah, it's kind of like the next step in the AI debate that we've all been fearing.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that OpenAI say that they used another voice actress who they're not naming for privacy reasons. But the fact that like a couple of days before it was released, they went back to Scarlett and said, hey, man, like, just want to let you know we still really want to use your voice. What do you think about this, Mel? It feels like one of the main concerns around AI at the moment is what it could do to the creative industries, whether that's writing, music, film, art, whatever. And you'd think that these companies or the people behind them would be a little bit aware of what it looks like to potentially just rip off a very famous person's voice.
Yeah, to me, this is so odd. Firstly, like, even approaching Scarlett Johansson in the first place, when she was one of the actors that's kind of contributing huge amounts of money to end the strike stalemate and is very involved in those discussions about the role of AI. To approach her to be the voice of AI in the first place feels like an odd decision. Then to approach her because potentially linking the AI voice to the film Her is also maybe missing the point, because that film showed a lot of the potential dangers that can come from the role of AI in our life. That's also odd. And then again, to seek a voice that has been called sexy, sultry, very overly feminine, also is a huge misstep for a company that is trying to position itself as forward thinking. So I just feel like this is a strange choice on top of a strange choice on top of a strange choice, and is a kind of worrying sign of who's at the helm of this company.
Yeah, it's almost like these tech bros are not very good at like very normal things.
I know, it's like they thought it was a really funny like wink or something, and everyone was like, you've completely cooked it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the fact that the movie Her is kind of not really a glowing endorsement of AI. I feel like by the end of the movie, you're like, oh, this is terrible for the potential alienation of society. Someone on social media pointed out that this is now the third movie about tech or science that Sam Altman has completely misunderstood the meaning of. In 2023, Sam Altman tweeted, I was hoping that the Oppenheimer movie would inspire a generation of kids to be physicists, but it really missed the mark on that. Yeah, no shit. The movie where the guy says at the end, I think we destroyed the world, is not supposed to inspire people to make nuclear bombs. Like that's the point of the movie, Sam Altman.
Yeah,
at the end of
the point was to question the role of.
Has he not seen Young Sheldon, about a young physicist?
And at the end of that tweet, he said in brackets, I think the social network managed to do this for startup founders. So basically he's saying, I think the social network did encourage people to be startup founders, and that's good. Again, definitely not the point of the movie, The Social Network.
I love that he watched it and that's why he is now doing this. It was all because of The Social Network. Yeah. Though it did make me think, I started to think about films that probably shouldn't have inspired me, but then, that did. Oh. I was thinking about Black Swan. I was like, that makes the ballet I thought that makes the ballet world look kind of like cool, which was not the point of that film.
Interesting. Yeah, I watched Godzilla X Kong, and that made me want to be a podcaster. So that's
Well, you live in your dream.
I recently saw Dune 2. That made me want to kill myself. I'm not sure if you guys...
Or become like a giant worm.
I wished I could have buried my head in the sand for the entire 5 hours.
We're not relitigating Dune 2. It's too early. One of the other things I wanted to touch on briefly with you guys is the Taylor Swift versus Billie Eilish war that's kind of been raging the pop culture charts, pop culture discourse for the past week. You guys across this?
Yeah, you couldn't see, but just so in an attempt to let you see, I like physically eye rolled my whole body when you said versus each other. I don't know.
What is this your take saying that it's unfair to pit two women against each other?
Well, maybe we should question the pitting of the two
I know. I
women
think
against each
I'm
other.
ready for this conversation because Taylor Swift is so actively doing something that I think is quite like nefarious here that I don't think people who comment on it should be portrayed as evil people. Let's just break this down, right? So Billie Eilish released her latest studio album, Hit Me Hard and Soft, last week on Friday. I actually really enjoyed the album. I think it's got some real fun songs on it. It's a bit too short for me. I think she was like experimenting with some fun new ideas and musical styles, and then it sort of just ends. But I thought it was pretty good. Did you guys enjoy it?
I loved it. I thought it was such a mature album. I found it quite shocking that she's only 22. I thought it was full of surprises, and I kind of like, it does have that old Billie style of the ballads and the whispers, but then I really loved like the kind of synth pop songs too that kind of moved to the dance floor. I thought it was a really interesting record, and yeah, I've been listening to it a lot.
I'll be totally honest, I was in the Northern Territory last week and I was mostly listening to Troy Cassidy. They don't really do Billie Eilish up there.
That's appropriate.
So I haven't...
That's appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's good to know that you like the album, Mel, because I did also, and I think you'll be shocked to learn what your number one fave, Taylor Swift, is doing to poor Billie. So, in the lead up to the album's release, Billie talked in interviews about the tendency of artists now, some artists, to release multiple physical versions of the same album on vinyl to basically juice their numbers, to get their fans to buy 12 copies in the case of the Midnight's release rather than just one. Their fans love them, they'll spend all their pocket money on it, and the album sales will go through the roof, helping get that song to the top of the Billboard charts. She said it was unethical, and she said it was really bad for the environment, and everyone basically interpreted that as a bit of a dig at Taylor Swift because she is the person who is the most prominently involved with this. So anyway, Billie's album comes out on Friday. On the very same day, Taylor Swift decides to release 3 new digital-only versions of her most recent album, The Tortured Poets Department, and these include extra tracks, including first draft phone memos. So basically just a voice recording of Taylor singing some harmonies and choruses. Her fans obviously buy these up because they will do anything Taylor tells them to do. Tortured Poets album has been number 1 for 4 weeks. The most obvious chance coming up for it to be knocked out of that position was Billie Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft. The chart numbers at the moment, it's a little bit early to tell, we'll find this out next week, suggest that Billie's probably aiming for a number 2 spot, gonna get pipped by Taylor because she chose that same day, the release day of Billie Eilish's album, to juice the numbers again. Now, that's not me saying I'm just going to pit 2 random women against each other for the sake of it. That's Taylor Swift launching a salvo at Billie Eilish, keeping her from the number 1 spot. Like, quite obviously, isn't it?
Firstly, I'd like to say that I love both these women, and I don't, as much as you like to identify me as Taylor's number 1 fangirl, I'm kind of generally just interested in her as a phenomenon. I don't identify as a Swiftie personally. I will say a few things to this that
that I will begin saying now.
That I will begin. It's like the terms of the debate. No, I think there is an interesting discussion about the release of vinyl albums and multiple versions of the album. But I will note that Eilish has released 9 vinyl editions of Hit Me, 4 separate CD options, a cassette, and a deluxe album that is different. So I will say that, and Eilish herself has acknowledged that she too releases multiple vinyl albums. And that is...
What does that have to do with Taylor Swift doing new releases on the day of Billie's album?
Well, I think what has pitted them up against each other in your mind is the story leading up to this, that Billie makes a comment about the vinyl albums. Taylor is, for some reason, offended by that and then drops her vinyl albums on the same day. Like, the narrative leading up to this release is that it's some kind of act against Billie, which is what I guess I'm refuting. I don't think it's an act against Billie. I think Taylor always releases vinyl albums. I would also question whether Billie did, like, I think this album's going to do really well, but whether realistically she, and we will find out, be number 1, only for a number of reasons, because the album track is so small. It's got 10 songs compared to what Taylor's albums have. So the chances of that album going to number 1 are already lower. And also, like, if you look at it, Tortured Poets Department has sold kind of, 2 2.5 million albums. I mean, that's just abroad. It's obviously album figures are hard to compute, but that's almost like half of what Billie has sold in her entire career. So I do wonder whether this story that Taylor has stopped Billie from getting to number one is really true. Like, I'm questioning, I guess, Taylor's intent, or the intent that has been attributed to her, and the reality of whether that is what's stopping Billie from getting to number one.
All right, Tree Payne over here, Taylor Swift's publicist. I don't think that explains what happened in the past week, to be honest with you, because Taylor Swift's album moved a stack of units, right, in its first few weeks. We're now into week 5 of that album. One of the biggest pop stars in the world, probably the second biggest female pop star in the world after Taylor Swift, is Billie Eilish. She has won 2 Academy Awards. She's won a bunch of Grammys. For her to release an extremely anticipated album that is getting pretty good critical response, it would be normal for that to be considered number one, particularly when the Tortured Poets Department is in its 5th week. The only reason that would continue to be number one is if everyone had bought a whole bunch of new copies of that, which they have done because Taylor released new copies with the extra voice memo stuff on it. I don't think it's a coincidence that she just managed to do that the week, not even the week, the day of the Billie album release.
Okay, so even if we take your point that Taylor is deliberately trying to stay at number one, is that like, is there something wrong with that? I mean, why are men allowed to compete all the time and we don't make them have to, we don't make them have to stand out of the way to let another man come to the top? I don't know, like, this is saying, even if we take, which I disagree with, your imputation that Taylor is deliberately trying to sabotage Billie or to stay ahead of her, why is she not allowed to have a competitive attitude?
But at least do it the proper way and start releasing diss tracks. I don't know why.
What?
No, I do. I see. This is very fun for me to watch, number one. I see the point you're both making, but I do think...
I know where you're going to fall on this, and it does not surprise me.
No, but like... I would say the same thing, I think.
Well, we did do a whole episode on 2 men fighting each other. And so it's fine for 2 women to be competitive and want to, like, edge each other out. But that's kind of the point. Like, you're sort of saying... started this conversation saying don't pit these people against each other. I'm like, if Billie and Taylor are in an antagonistic relationship over commercial album sales right now to get to number one, they're definitely allowed to do that. I think the tactics and strategy of Taylor choosing this particular moment in terms of setting up a competition with Billie in particular and doing it not through the actual release of Tortured Poets, but through this modern way of just trying to rinse your fans for more money. It feels crass to me on a number of levels. It feels crass on the level of you're just extracting more money from your desperate fans who have this parasocial relationship with you when you're already the wealthiest and most successful artist on the planet. That's one, to me, that feels a little bit weird. And 2, you're doing it at a time where you're stopping another young pop artist who is a generation below you from receiving the number one, which is a significant potential achievement. Both of those things, it's valid. She's allowed to do it. I'm not saying she's not allowed to do it. She should be sent to jail for doing it. But it doesn't end with her looking great in my view.
I do kind of agree with that. Shocking. No, I do kind of agree with that, though, because if it was a case of, like, Billie's album and Taylor's album coming out on the same day, and then it was just like, it's a fair competition. But I think given we know how dominant and talented and just like the saturation levels of Taylor Swift, it does make it feel, and there is already, I guess, this like mythology around her that she is, kind of suffocating the culture with her dominance, which is not her fault, but then to actively like release this 5th version with extra voice memos like on the same day that Billie's releasing her new album, it's like, how this is all going to pan out, and it just doesn't lend itself to...
you liking Taylor Swift
Correct.
anymore. Well, look, I think we're going to have to disagree on this one.
Well, look, Taylor Swift did get another victory, literally today, in the Apple Music Top 100 albums of all time. This is something that Apple has been doing over 10 days. They release 10 albums in the countdown each day. They're saying that this is not based on like streaming numbers. It's just an editorial subjective viewpoint based on this panel of experts and some musicians that they've got. There's kind of interesting stuff to talk about with this one, but I reckon we could start with running through the top 10 countdown of the top Apple albums of all time. Starting from number 10, working our way to number 1. It's Lemonade by Beyonce, Nevermind by Nirvana, Back to Black, Amy Winehouse, Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar, Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder, Blonde by Frank Ocean, Purple Rain by Prince, Abbey Road by the Beatles, Thriller by Michael Jackson. Number 1, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill by Lauryn Hill.
Play do what?
Takes on that top 10, firstly. How do you guys feel about it?
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, Mel and I spoke about this beforehand. These lists are designed, I guess, for conversations like this. They are always going to be controversial. I saw someone post it being like, was this list designed to exclusively make me angry? And the answer probably is yes. Like, there is absolutely no, we don't, like, it isn't based on any kind of data. It's just like a bunch of nameless people creating a list that then is released into, the internet, and then off we go to discuss it. The other hard thing is, like, when there is no kind of criteria, these are all great albums. You could possibly make an argument for many of them to be number 1, except I don't know how Blonde got on there, even though I love that album.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of the things about why that album from that artist as well. Yeah,
it's really weird. But yeah, I guess, like, and especially starting at the top, I suppose, like Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, one of my favorite albums, so great. But I don't even know what my number 1 album would be, but I don't know if it would be that.
I was happy with The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill as number 1. I'm comfortable. I think that fits quite nicely there. I don't know, the top 10, none of them were really surprising to me. I think they're all worthy places in the top 10. Could they have been in the top 20 and others have been in there? Sure. I don't know. I do take these lists, as Thomas was saying, with a grain of salt, because obviously they're hugely subjective and I don't know actually how useful they are. But yeah, all those albums deserve a place in top 10. So yeah, I wasn't shocked by any.
Yeah, I feel like the list making is sort of partly let's make some people angry, and partly we just need to like mention every giant act from the past 70 years somewhere so people don't actually kill us. So there's got to be a Beatles record, there's got to be a Michael Jackson record, there's got to be Nirvana, because, even though that genre of music is dead, it was a big album for a bunch of people who are on our platform. So it's almost feels like a little bit focus grouped now as well. It was interesting doing the breakdown by genre. Hip-hop was the most represented genre with 21 tracks. Rock then second with 18, and pop third with 16. That's what it feels, feels right in terms of what are generally considered, really iconic albums. Taylor Swift, she with 1989, Taylor's Version, was at number 18. Billie Eilish with When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, 30. So that's another victory for Taylor Swift over Billie this week.
Oh no, better take it down a notch.
Weird that there is no John Mayer.
So yeah, let's talk about some of the ones that stood out to me as being a little bit odd. Like Blonde, fine album, but like it's better than Channel Orange. Since when did we agree that was a thing that was a thing, basically? I'm not crazy for thinking that, right?
No, definitely not. That was the weirdest addition to me. Good Kid, Mad City, fair enough. I don't know. It's a very strange list. But yeah, definitely Frank Ocean has, like, obviously he's got like nudes of someone at Apple because he's snuck onto that list.
Yeah, like I could have easily replaced him with like Rumours, even Adele's 21, Blue, Joni Mitchell. I feel like there were a lot of others that could have been substituted for that.
I was going to say The Chronic, Dr. Dre in at 19. I love that.
The most egregious thing on this list, though, genuinely to me, is My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy being 26. And maybe that's like a Kanye is insane thing, but it's like, okay, we're going to have Michael Jackson and like various cooked artists in the top 10. What's the argument for not putting what is widely considered one of the most groundbreaking albums of history outside the top 25? Like that's strange to me.
Did Eminem make the list?
I don't believe Eminem made the list.
Oh no, the Marshall.
Ah, true, number 80.
Yeah.
There you go.
Number 80.
So we can cut this, but did John Mayer actually not make the list at all?
John Mayer? Why would John Mayer make the list?
John Mayer didn't make the list. What did he have? One song, My Body is a Wonderland?
No, fucking...
John Mayer deserved to make the list via Taylor, and that's it.
I mean, like, all of us have been involved, in making these kinds of lists. And they're kind of fun. And, Mel, you did one not that long ago with all of the Kylie Minogue songs. And it's pretty interesting. And you know that it's going to spark a debate. That's part of the reason. It's about people saying, I love that, I don't love that, I want that moved around. One of the things I find odd about lists is that they're never going to be objective, right? You've got different people with different perspectives, and there are obviously some arguments being had around like, why that album? Why is it 19 and not 17? I find that conversation more interesting than the end result itself. Like, I'd way rather see the working out of the conversation. I don't know if Apple's going to release like videos of the producers or I think there's some artists like Charlie XCX and Bad Bunny involved in these conversations. I'd love to watch those guys arguing and talking through like that. That's interesting. Criticism isn't just a number out of 10 or isn't just a ranking on a list, but people justifying why Miseducation of Lauryn Hill deserves to be number one versus other albums. And when you just get the list, it feels a bit reductive and pointless at that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think Apple, and we should demand that Apple release the marking scorecards for this so that we can see how they were graded and judged and who ranked what where. That's definitely more interesting. But I do think these lists are fun, aren't they? Because they do let you kind of see your own musical education and revisit albums, discover new albums. I haven't listened to quite a few of these albums, and some I haven't listened to for some time. So I also find that they do have a value in that sense.
Wow, the Blueprint is super high by Jay-Z. So I'm actually just going through the list officially now.
Why is this the first? You're the one who wanted to talk about this, and this seems like the first time you've read the list. Is John Mayer on there?
I didn't look at the full list, but anyway.
3 members of the Knowles Carter family with 4 albums. Beyonce, Solange, and Jay-Z. That's pretty strong representation. It's like 4% of the list.
Yeah, they're a big deal.
And as far as I can tell, only is AC/DC the only Australian act on the list?
Yeah, Australia copping some L's there. Who the Australians you would have liked to see up there? Troy Cassar-Daley?
I mean, obviously Troy Cassar-Daley, Brad Cox.
Kid Laroi?
No, I think like I'm kind of surprised. I thought like these types of lists, especially, I would have seen like maybe Tame Impala on the list or something.
Oh yeah, I can see there's a case for that.
All right, let's talk Furiosa. Before we get into this film, the latest installment in the Mad Max franchise, where are you guys at with Mad Max? Are you fans of the earlier films? You fans of Fury Road? How do you feel about the post-apocalyptic world cooked up by George Miller?
I'm a huge Mad Max fan, and I have seen all of them up to the latest one. And I think it's very easy, as much as, I think the films are good in and of themselves, but I also think the significance of the film culturally is what's really interesting. And it's easy to forget so many decades on from the first Mad Max just how huge it was for Australian cinema at the time, because it was during that exploitation phase of the 70s and 80s, these kind of budget films with these shaky cams, and Mad Max cut through, and it cut through globally, and it showed that Australia could do action with an Australian accent on it. And then these films have kind of been so significant globally, and also for filmmaking in Australia. Pretty much all of them, apart from one, has been shot in Australia. So I think their role in Australia's cinematic history and relevance globally is often kind of overlooked, only because there was such a gap between the first films and then kind of Fury Road in 2015 and this one now, that you kind of forget the original origin story of where this franchise has grown from. And I think like also when it came out in the 80s, a lot of the kind of desert stories in Australian fiction, and sorry, now I feel like I'm giving like a TED talk or something.
No, keep going, you're cooking.
A lot of the films leading up, when you had films and stories about going into the desert was often this kind of unknown place. It was this real colonial lens. And then Mad Max came along and the desert is wild and barren, but it's because of what humans have done to it. It's because of what white people have done to it. They've overfarmed it. They've exploited it for oil. So I always thought that was really interesting about the films as well. And it was a very early example of like climate fiction too, and like, water and drought have always been central to these films. So for that reason, I really do like Mad Max.
Great.
That was a very...
That's an extensive relationship.
Yeah, I just co-signed everything you said. Great explanation.
Yeah, as above, I agree. I like, my mum and dad were really into them growing up. I hadn't actually watched the original 3 until like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, kind of maybe around the time that Fury Road came out. But yeah, look, as we've discussed previously and today on this pod, I'm not a big fan of like sand-related epic films, but this I will make an exception. And yeah, I mean, I thought Furiosa was amazing. We'll obviously get into it, but yeah, I've always been here for the Mad Max universe. And I guess like it was really the making of Mel Gibson. He's obviously become a strange figure for like people to process now, especially Australians. But that early era Mel Gibson, like man, he was on one with some of those films, and it all really started with Mad Max.
I love that Taylor gets demon and Mel Gibson gets strange.
I mean, that's just a demon.
He definitely didn't say that. I went through our archives with the help of our wonderful library staff here at the Herald and asked them to dig up like our coverage of Mad Max when it was first released. And interestingly, the first reference is in 1977, so a couple of years before the movie came out. And it's like, this doctor from Queensland, George Miller, has managed to get together $350,000 to make this, you know, weird apocalyptic movie that's about cars. And then a few months after that, it's like, 2 NIDA graduates cast in their first film, Mel Gibson and Steve Bisley. They're ready to give real acting a go. It's so odd to think that is the genesis of what became the biggest Australian film franchise in history. And funnily enough, I also looked up our first review of Mad Max in the Sydney Morning Herald. It was not good.
Did Mel write it?
The reviewer, Mel Dubois, who reviewed a lot of movies for the Herald, I think, in the 70s, said the movie was brutal but lacked social value. She was not into, I guess, some of the violence. And I have to say, I don't know when the last time you watched like the first Mad Max was, but I rewatched it in anticipation for Furiosa. It is way more depraved and violent than I remember. Like a brilliant movie, but there is some very, very intense stuff. And I think, you know, it's in service of the plot. It's not just there for the sake of it, but it's kind of crazy to think that this, you know, there's this kind of Australian exploitation movie, as you said, Mel, influenced by George Miller's work as a doctor in Queensland treating car crash victims, became this huge franchise and what is now the most expensive Australian film ever. It's such a fascinating journey from that film to where we are now.
Yeah, totally. And like the aesthetics are so completely different. As you said, it's such a dark kind of austere film in a way, real revenge narrative after his family is killed, to the kind of hyper-saturation that Fury Road and Furiosa are known for. It has been a really interesting journey, but I think that's also part of why I like it. Like, you know, even the shift towards different gender roles in the characters with Furiosa essentially replacing Mad Max, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is an interesting, like, how that franchise is adapting and reflecting what's
George
going
Miller
on in
went,
our world.
Mad Max has gone woke, is what you're saying.
I don't think that's quite what I'm saying, but yeah, I do think that, I actually think, to be fair, they have done those changes in a good way, like in an interesting way. Like, I actually don't think it comes across as overly woke. Do you?
No, sorry, I didn't mean to. I think it's just more, and we'll talk about this when we get into Furiosa. I think his more explicit engagement with very contemporary political themes is much more noticeable in the last couple of films. His filmography is crazy. He makes the 3 Mad Max films, then he goes on a detour with like Babe and Babe Pig in the City, Happy Feet 1 and Happy Feet 2, and he's like, you know what? I'm doing Fury Road, man. We got to go back to Mad Max. It is such a strange journey for a director who started in Oz exploitation land. Mel, you unfortunately weren't able to see Furiosa this week. You were unwell. So Thomas and I will probably do most of the chatting in this one, but you know, jump in at any moment with your thoughts or questions. All right, so Furiosa, prequel to Fury Road, starring Anya Taylor-Joy as a younger version of the character played by Charlize Theron in Fury Road, and Chris Hemsworth as her key antagonist. He's a kind of nomadic warlord called Dementus. The movie opens with a young Furiosa, played in the first section of the film actually by a young Australian actress, Alila Brown, being snatched from the Green Place, this kind of idyllic paradise in this otherwise post-apocalyptic hellscape, by a group of bikers who take her to Hemsworth's Dementus. She tries unsuccessfully to escape before being traded to Immortan Joe, who rules over the Citadel, which is the key location for most of the action in Fury Road took place. She eventually does escape. She blends into the world of the Citadel. She plots her eventual escape back to the Green Place and revenge on Dementus. In this movie, there's significantly more world building than we got in Fury Road, which was kind of just like a straightforward road movie and a chase film. Other than the Citadel, we got hints of this broader world in this landscape, but we didn't see them. But in Furiosa, places like Gastown and the Bullet Farm, which were alluded to, are kind of fully realized, and the action takes place in and around a kind of universe that is more fleshed out, I think. There's also a really interesting stretch of the film where Furiosa teams up with a very Mad Max-like character, this guy called Praetorian Jack, played by Tom Burke. I really enjoyed that element of it as well. It's kind of like, we've got a story that is very different. It's about a different character, but we know that people also want to see a guy in a leather jacket driving cars around, so let's include him in this too. I think the biggest challenge the film faced is the obvious comparison to Fury Road, widely considered to be one of the best action films of this century. I think when you get over that and you realize that, yes, this movie is obviously a prequel, it's set in the same universe, it's not trying to tell the same kind of story, it's trying to do something a little bit different and something with a bit more scope, more history. I think some more broader political scope as well. Like, I think Fury Road focused on feminism and environmental destruction. Here, there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of talk about humanity's just inability to stop going to war with one another and the damage that is doing on both a personal and community level. And I think there's some playing around with like interesting ideas around class as well. I watched this movie in IMAX. It looked and sounded awesome. For me, the real highlight is Chris Hemsworth as Dementor. He's brilliant. He's having a lot of fun. He's bringing this kind of Shakespearean lunatic presence to the stage. I think he kind of outshined Anya in a lot of scenes, but I think she did a really great job as well, channeling that kind of quiet fury that Charlize really displayed in Fury Road. I had an awesome time with this movie overall. Thomas, what did you think?
Yeah, I really liked it. I agree that we were actually having this conversation not too long ago where it was like, is Chris Hemsworth a good actor? Like, we all know he's really famous and like jacked and he's in Marvel movies and stuff. But like, has he ever done anything where you're like, wow, that was like Chris Hemsworth like kind of owned that? And this, I think, is that movie. Kind of from the first time you meet Dementor, it's like, wow, he's got, kind of some prosthetics. They've made him, like, it still looks like Chris Hemsworth in prosthetics, but he looks a bit weird. And pretty quickly I was like, okay, like, he's going for this almost like Jack Sparrow meets like Heath Ledger's the Joker. He's kind of like almost a bit camp. And the way he speaks is really interesting. I don't know, the whole thing, I was like, okay, I'm here for this. And I did think he kind of stole the movie. Visually, it was like, I also saw it in IMAX. I almost think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't see this in IMAX. And even the way the movie sounds, everything about it was like, it's such a movie-going experience. And it was funny, like looking in it was like IMAX was packed, and you could see people like actively like sitting back in their chairs as if they were being like forced back by the actual like weight of the film. Yeah, it was incredible. It did definitely feel like, as you said, I feel like Fury Road is widely accepted now as this like, wow, that is, the kind of benchmark for a modern action film. And this felt a little bit more like drifting into the Marvel territory of like, are we being set up for the Mad Max universe completely now? Because we did, see a lot more of the Wasteland universe. And will there be like, will it be another 8 years before we get another Mad Max, or will it be like 2 or something? Like,
or will we get, the Mad Max TV show spin-offs exploring certain characters? I think that's potentially something that could happen here.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like that, or maybe George Miller like hands the IP over to someone else, and they do make a 10-part Disney show out of it or whatever. And then I did, even though I like enjoyed the film, I walked away thinking like, oh, it does feel perhaps like Hollywood has kind of got its claws in the Mad Max franchise now. And are we going to get like an Immortan Joe 10-parter, or are we going to start to see it diluted and broken down and like basically sold off for parts?
Yeah, I mean, George Miller is 79 now. People said that when Fury Road came out, that was going to be the last one. I think it's amazing that he's come back with this one, and it is as good as it is. But, the IP of the film, I think it's owned by Warner Brothers, or at least Warner Brothers is the company behind this. Warner Brothers is now part of Warner Brothers Discovery, which owns HBO and all these sorts of things. And you're seeing this happen with Dune, right? Well, we've got the Dune films, and simultaneously to the Dune films, we've got the Dune TV series. Trailer dropped for Dune Prophecy, which is about the history of the Bene Gesserit, the kind of nuns in that. I feel like, and I don't begrudge George for this at this stage of his life, his career, if he's just like, give me $1 billion, I will retire happy, my family will never have to work again, and you can make whatever Mad Max films or shows you want. I don't really begrudge him for that. I don't think the movie is like the movie isn't bad because of the world building he's done. It kind of all works, but you're spot on, Thomas. You can see, cool, let's get the history of the Green Place. Let's get a drama set in what's going on in Bullet Town. Mad Max has always done that in a really interesting way where in Fury Road, there were those guys on stilts just kind of walking in the wasteland in this sort of marsh.
Yeah.
And it's never explained. And there's been stuff like that throughout the franchise's history. You don't have this overriding, this dialogue, this exposition. You're just kind of thrown into it. This one had a bit more of that. Even at the start of this film, you have this montage of news clips that allude to how we ended up in this apocalyptic hellspace. Things like pandemic, nuclear war, environmental destruction. It felt a little bit more like George linking very current things going on to what's happened. I think, Mel, you mentioned that the first Mad Max films always had a little bit of that going on, but it was never laid out for us explicitly. Manohla Dargis in the New York Times review of this film made the point that, you know, we never really talked about George Miller being a prophet, but as like time has gone on and the world has edged closer to the kinds of battles over resources that he first talked about in the 70s, and this movie kind of shrinking that gap between reality and fiction even more, it has become like a more prophetic franchise.
And did you feel that that kind of world building slowed it down? Because definitely the original two and the third one is a bit of an interesting outlier of a film. But the first two and even Fury Road are quite simple stories of revenge. Like it's a very clear pattern, almost like a fable, which then, you know, allows him to do spectacular stuff elsewhere. But did you feel that it slowed it down, that they were developing too much of the world, that it detracted?
It's a really interesting question. I enjoyed a lot of it. And there is a lot of great action set pieces, but at certain points I was wondering, and I don't often feel this about movies, I was like, just give me more crazy scenes of them on the road doing crazy stuff. Like there's a bit where they get to this big conflict and instead of showing it, it's just like a narration and a montage. And I'm like, what these movies do so well, particularly since Fury Road, are stunts that you're just like, they take your breath away. You know, my guy Steven Soderbergh has that famous quote about Fury Road. He's like, every time I watch it, I don't understand how there aren't like dead bodies here on the set. And some of the set pieces, I mean, most of them are astonishing. There's one in particular, which is like the big iconic war rig scene from Fury Road, and they take it to another level. And I'm like, that is amazing. And it's interesting that when the trailer for this film came out, I wasn't particularly excited. A lot of people seemed to react a bit negatively because it looked very CGI focused, not a lot of practical effects, and the CGI didn't look great. Sometimes we forget that trailers are released before all the work has been done on the visual effects. This looked really good. Like, it felt very practical. I didn't think the CGI looked bad. What did you think about that, Thomas?
Yeah, no, I think it didn't really bother me at all, and I just think the scope of some of those set pieces is like so amazing. And like, you know, we spoke earlier before about how the rest of them have kind of been filmed in Australia. Mad Max Fury Road was like a lot in Namibia, but it was so nice to be. It was so obviously Australia again, having just recently returned from the Northern Territory for undisclosed reasons. But like, you know, that sense of the, you know, when you do get into those parts of Australia that feel like so barren and you're the only person in the world, like, it's nice to see that back on screen, and I just thought it looked incredible. It's been funny, you know, like the last week, I think George Miller has done a sit down and he spoke again about the strange relationship between Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron on Fury Road, and then inevitably, like, you know, it comes up as this movie comes out. But I thought the actual chemistry between Chris Hemsworth and Anya Taylor-Joy, they have some really intense scenes towards the end. And just like from a physical standpoint, like he is so imposing and she is quite like a little person. No, she's, you know, she's like slender and but like they feel like such a great match. And again, you know, like these are not dialogue heavy films, although Chris Hemsworth Dementus does have some long speeches, but I reckon Anya Taylor-Joy, like as Furiosa says, like, I don't know, 40 words in the whole film?
Yeah, not a lot. And it's a hard role because Charlize played that so well. And I've not historically been, like, I've never really gotten the Anya Taylor-Joy thing. I didn't love Queen's Gambit. I think she's in Northman, she's pretty cool, but I was really impressed with her in this. I think there is like that, you know, it's a bad pun, but a quiet fury, a rage, like what her motivations are, how she feels within each scene, what her goal is, like what the kind of struggles that she has about trying to make peace with where she's at whilst not losing sight of where she came from. She really does that very well through her face and her acting more so than through dialogue. So I thought she was wonderful in this film.
And it is interesting that she's going for these kind of quite big epic films. She was flagged at the end of June, and there's a lot of rumours that she will kind of be a main character in June Part 3. She's got a quite interesting career trajectory, and at this point, she kind of seems to be moving away from character roles and doing a lot more of these huge franchise action roles.
Do you think like this? I know that Fury Road, obviously was like made over 400 million at the box office. It was nominated for like 8 Academy Awards. It's like swept the technical categories, no acting awards. Do you suspect? Obviously, Mel, you haven't seen it, but do you suspect that it will be similar this time around? Do you think Chris could get a nom?
I think there's a chance Chris gets a nom. It might depend on what category he's in. He's probably in a bit too much for Best Supporting Actor, and it's probably not a good enough or big enough performance or kind of Oscar-worthy performance for Best Actor. But yeah, I think this will do very well in the technical categories. It'd be awesome if Chris got some sort of acknowledgement, because I think he's really trying and he's showing off the acting that he can do. And it's such a reversal of the Marvel stuff where he's the good guy. In this, he's playing the bad guy. His character's name is literally Dementus, I mean, the character names in this movie. Thomas, you mentioned the Australian landscape. The sheer Australianness of these movies I love them. Like, every Australian that guy actor like pops up in these movies. Some of the names, you have Immortan Joe, you got Praetorian Jack. It's just ridiculous. My personal favorite is so Lockie Hume plays 2 characters. He plays Immortan Joe, and he plays this one-eyed sort of consigliere to Dementus. His character's name is Ridsdale Pell. Right, George Ridsdale, one of the most notorious pedophile priests in Ballarat, and George Pell. What is George Miller doing? That's bad.
That is so weird. I did not know that. That is, yeah, right. That's layered. That's a layered drive-by from George.
And there
Miller.
is some, pedophile stuff in this film. Sorry, that's just coming out of nowhere, but there are some pretty like dark characters and dark moments in this film.
Wow. And fun fact that I was reading that apparently Bathurst, where they were filming around, was too green. So like in post-production, they had to remove all the greenery to make it have that arid look, which I thought was kind of interesting, but also the case for Australian government supporting filmmaking here because it was because of the rebates and incentives that they kept it in Australia, really, versus 2015 when those rebates weren't here and they took Fury Road elsewhere.
But one of the good things about Fury Road being in Namibia is that Mel Gibson didn't want to go there. There's like some quotes from him and his wife sort of not really wanting to be in Africa, make of that what you will. And I do think that movie is better without like contemporary Mel Gibson in there. So
yeah,
yes.
that was a great decision on behalf of everyone.
I wonder if Miller was like, how do I get rid of Mel from this franchise?
Given that the first set of films was a trilogy, we're now on 2 of the newest Mad Maxes, but Happy Feet and Babe are both also arrested on 2. What does George Miller do next? Are we going to see Babe 3, Piggy Road, or are we going to see some kind of Happy Feet? I would love to see another Babe, get James Cromwell, Magda Szymanski back together. It's like this. I mean, there's so much to do there.
Give us the Babe expanded universe. I think he's nearly 80. I don't know if he's going to make another movie.
He'll probably end up coaching South.
I wouldn't mind him taking like another animal franchise and like what if he did like a Winnie the Pooh or something? Like I wouldn't mind another animal franchise.
Well, that IP is up for the taking, aren't they? They're making it.
It is Winnie the Pooh is out of copyright.
Oh,
one of the conversations around films in 2024 has been that they're not performing at the box office as well as anticipated. The Fall Guy did okay, but didn't do amazingly. There's not a lot of big tentpole releases, big event movies on the calendar. This is one. After this, it's the new Marvel one, Deadpool vs. Wolverine. There's the Joker sequel. There's not much else. I think this could do very well. It's being released in IMAXs around the world. That costs a bit more, is good for box office results. It's a pretty bare like cinema listings at the moment. I don't know if you guys have looked at what's on, but people message me. They're like, what do I see? I'm like, there's not a heap on. There's actually a pretty great film. It's a bit violent, probably not a family-friendly movie. But I wonder whether this could break the drought and do quite well. Maybe get to that $400-500 million mark at the box office.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it is funny that like I read that kind of similar articles about Fall Guy like not really doing what it was supposed to do, and like there was such a I guess, a thought from the studio of like, we'll pluck Ryan Gosling from the biggest film of last year and Emily Blunt from the other biggest film of last year and put them together, and we can't lose in this, with like kind of semi-existing IP, and it'll be funny and look amazing. And then it did okay, but it didn't like set the world on fire, The Fall Guy. And then it is strange looking at the rest of the year. Like, I think Deadpool versus Wolverine will be fucking enormous. Like, I reckon that will go bonkers. Everyone loves the Deadpool character. Then we're bringing back in, Wolverine and the popularity of Hugh Jackman. I reckon that'll go crazy. But the rest of the year is kind of like, lacking in things to look forward to in terms of like big box office hits. So yeah, I suspect that Mad Max will do really well. And we've already seen like, what did June 2 do? Like crazy numbers.
Yeah, 800 million or so, maybe it got close to $1 billion. I mean, it's interesting. Australia's punching above its weight when it comes to bringing in box office results this year. Anyone But You, big hit into the start of this year, filmed in Sydney. The Fall Guy, didn't do enormously, still is making quite a lot of money, filmed in Australia. Mad Max Furiosa, filmed in Australia, largely Australian cast, Australian director. Deadpool vs. Wolverine, he's Australia. What, like, that's cool.
Yeah, Australians are cool. I've been saying it for ages.
Yeah, that's great. It's our year, and hopefully there'll be a showing at some of the award ceremonies too.
That being said, one of my other, I know we're about to get onto this, but one of my other most anticipated films of the year is also shot in Australia. And that is Nicolas Cage.
Ah, The Surfer?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you guys a bit about Cannes, which has been happening over the last week. And this has been a particularly interesting one to watch because of the fact that the big studio films, like we've said, there's not a heap to get excited about. So what is playing at Cannes, what is getting good reactions and being highly anticipated could give us a slightly more fleshed out, second half of the year if these films get picked up and distributed in Australia. One of those that got a really great reception was The Surfer, the Nick Cage film, Thomas.
Yeah, so that's was shot up in WA, I think. Nicolas Cage plays, I think he's on the run or something, and then he kind of gets into falls in with a surf gang. It feels like kind of an exploitation, B movie vibe. I did want to say before we get into this, do we think at this point the standing ovation thing at Cannes is getting ridiculous?
It is. It's now become a complete joke, right? Where for people who don't know, different media outlets are now recording the length of standing ovations different films get. Some of them are 7 minutes, some of them are 11 minutes, some of them are 17 minutes. It's always been a very Cannes-specific thing, and I think now it's become a bit of a joke. People are making kind of memes about it. Hans Moleman, man gets hit in head by football, 17-minute standing ovation at Cannes. It's funny stuff. It seems completely ridiculous because it often has nothing to do with the quality of the film. It's just, this director's back, let's just stand up and clap. Honestly, I could not imagine anything worse than being forced to clap for 7 minutes, let alone 17.
I can imagine being the person who has to receive the clapping for that long. What do you do? I hate when people
I would be
sing
fine
Happy
with that bit, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Shocking.
I hate when people sing Happy Birthday for 30 seconds. What do you do for 7 minutes of I just, every time I see the footage of people having to smile and say thank you for 7, 13, 15 minutes, I just internally shrivel up and die.
A few years ago, Adam Driver got one for, I don't know, it can't have been for that weird Italian movie. But anyway, he got one.
Which
and
one?
It was the 6th minute and he lit up a cigarette and just started smoking it while we were.
That's boss.
Which I think is kind of great. But there's this weird new, not Yellowstone movie by Kevin Costner, and that got a 12-minute standing ovation. Are you fucking kidding me? 2 minutes is a long time. I don't know. I just find that whole thing weird. And then it does become this it's almost like a calling card. They've got a 10-minute standing ovation. It must be amazing.
It's like the new star ranking.
Yeah, exactly. So that is very weird. But yeah, Nicolas Cage, as we all know, we know and love Nicolas Cage. He's got probably the strangest IMDb besides George Miller, I suppose. Yeah. He does horror movies, amazing movies, Oscar movies, insane movies, B movies, action movies, and it sounds like The Surfer might tick a lot of those boxes. So yeah, I'm very excited about that one.
You mentioned Kevin Costner in the Horizon film. I'm sort of excited by that. I like Yellowstone, and this is Kevin Costner kind of ditching Yellowstone and putting all of his money into Horizon New Dawn, an American sort of Western frontier film. Apparently it's not great. It just basically looks like a TV show, and he's doing part 1 and then he's doing 6 weeks later in cinemas part 2. That's kind of wacky, but I guess I applaud lunatic people in the film industry putting all their money into their passion projects, which brings me to what looks like one of the craziest films ever made. And we've talked about this earlier in the year when we were previewing upcoming when we were previewing upcoming movies, Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis starring Adam Driver. This is crazy. I mean, the reviews on this one are just wacky. Some people are convinced it's, brilliant auteurist cinema at its best. Other people say it's a total mess. It makes no sense. It has now just received an Australian distributor in Madman, so it will be coming to Australian cinemas, hopefully later this year. I'm very excited to watch it. Like, I'm famously one of the 3 people in the world that thought Babylon, Damien Chazelle's very messy, strange movie about Hollywood, was great. I like Coppola. I feel like even if it's a bit of a weird movie, again, I back the fact that he sold off his entire, estate to make this film, which seems to be a statement on the death and decay of American empire. He's a great artist making a crazy movie about ideas he cares about. Let's watch it.
Yes, I'm very excited for this film, whether or not it was filmed in Australia. Just that he has staked so much on it and that he sees it as the kind of epitome of his career and how it's going to throw all his other films in a different light. I can't wait.
The other film that made some headlines this week, The Apprentice, Ali Abbasi, Iranian director's new film about Donald Trump, starring Sebastian Stan as Donald Trump and starring Jeremy Strong as Trump's lawyer during this era. It's pretty interesting. It's got some controversy for a seemingly quite explicit scene of sexual assault that Trump allegedly perpetrates based on some divorce documents, I think, with his ex-wife. That was sort of the main story coming out of Cannes. I mean, we love Jeremy Strong. Sebastian Stan certainly looks a lot like Donald Trump. I'm pretty interested in this one.
Yeah, I'm kind of keen to check in on Jeremy Strong too, see that he's back on his feet into a new character. Yeah, I've missed Jeremy from our screens.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this one. And we've already seen Trump tweeting madly about it. Rubbish movie, garbage. Probably hasn't seen it. But yeah, it looks great. We've already, you got those leaked photos from set, and it was just Sebastian Stan as Trump sitting on a bench eating a sandwich. I was like, yeah, I am in for this. I actually reckon that could also be one that maybe is a bit of a surprise hit at the box office. We're going to be deep in, Trump content for the next few months as the election heats up and the debates and everything. So yeah, it's interesting timing, and I suspect that might do quite well. Plus, all the Succession heads will be so keen to see number one son back on screens.
Should we go to Cannes?
Yes, we should.
Yes, we absolutely. How do we get there?
Which hopefully someone listening to this podcast, either one of our bosses or someone more wealthier and some sort of patron just wants to send us there to do podcasts for 2 weeks. That could be a lot of fun.
I would love a patron. I think about kind of back in the day, the Renaissance, and having a patron. We all need one. We should all individually kind of acquire a patron.
I'm surprised you don't have one. You seem like the patron type.
The Nine Entertainment Company is our patron. What are you talking about? Let's move on to our Impress Your Friends segment, where we share something we watched, listened to, read, otherwise enjoy consuming this week. Mine's pretty quick. TV is in a bit of a lull, I reckon. I'm hoping that one of you has a great show to recommend, but I went a bit sideways, talk about music. Chief Keef has a new album, Almighty So Too. Back on my hip-hop thing after the Kendrick-Drake beef, I'm like, you know what? Country's over, man. Hip-hop is where it's at. Keef is like the godfather of Chicago drill. It's probably been one of the most interesting and influential genres in hip-hop over the past decade. This is a really great album. It's like a full return to the drill roots he had, but it feels like contemporary and progressive and fun. It's a really, really good album. It's really hard. Go listen to it. That's my recommendation.
Nice. I will. Well, I am this week recommending the Sydney Morning Herald 2024 Best Young Australian Novelists.
Are either of us on the list?
You are, absolutely not. But famously has written a book.
Yes.
We announce these every year. The prize is in its 28th year, which is kind of insane. And the winners get $5,000 thanks to the Copyright Agency's Cultural Fund. They have to be under 35 or 35 at the time of publication. So there you go. You've both got a few more years. The winners this year were Andre Dow, who wrote Anam, which is this kind of sweeping story based on his own family history. John Morrissey, who has written a really great, fun, interesting short story collection, kind of speculative fiction, and Emily O'Grady, whose novel Feast is really dark and full of tension, and she said it was inspired by this dream she had about Nick Cave and Tilda Swinton being in love, stuck in a gothic castle. So 3 really different books, 3 really interesting books, and kind of I read, I think there were more than 30 or so young novelists entered in the prize. So it's a really good way to get a temperature check about what's coming out of emerging writers in the country. And I think these three were really kind of, cream of the crop and a good sign of what is being written in Australia now. So, I'd recommend each of their books, and all three, because they're all so different.
They all sound very good. I'm keen, especially Feast. I think I want to check that out.
I think you would really like that.
I also have a book this week, actually, also by an Australian author.
Great.
Are you proud of me? This is Thunderhead by Miranda Darling. I'm not sure if either of you have read this.
I have read this.
Okay,
yes,
good.
I knew you would like this book.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a funny one. I guess I hate to be this person, but for fans of Rachel Cusk, it does feel very in that space, right down to the cover art, which looks basically like a Rachel Cusk book. But this is Thunderhead by Miranda Darling. She's an Australian author. It's basically set over the course of one day when we meet Winona Dalloway, and basically she's a mother of two who we learn is in this very strange relationship. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness book, but there are multiple voices that are kind of talking to each other as she, prepares for this dinner party. We kind of learn that she's in this coercive relationship. Her husband, who only is referred to as him or he, is not a very nice person. It's like this kind of snapshot of suburbia and motherhood and crushed dreams and all these different things. There's a lot going on, but it's very tense. It's a short book. You can read it basically in 1 or 2 sittings, but I've been really enjoying it. Plus there are the occasional side references to Sydney and Taronga Zoo. But yeah, it's great. It's gripping and it feels very contemporary. So if you're into that type of thing, that is Thunderhead by Miranda Darling. And the cover does look great. So if you chuck it on your grid, Osmond and I will probably like it. So that's what's up.
Your ability to turn every book review into a comment about the cover on Instagram is very funny to me. No, really good recs, books and music to listen to while we wait for good TV to come back. But there are a couple of exciting things on that front that I hope we will get to talk about in the next couple of weeks. Thomas and Mel, thanks so much, team.
Thank you.
That'll do, pig.
This episode of The Drop was produced by Chi Wong. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode of The Drop, make sure to follow us in your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. I'm Osman Faruqi. See you next week.